The seed oil trend, that's a real one. Like, we got to get rid of the seed oils because that is an industrial. Those are like industrial waste products, and that we're consuming them at these incredibly high levels.
Well, welcome back to Civically Minded, where I give you practical theology for everyday life. As always, I'm your host, Corey Wing. Did you know that all of my interview segments, just like this one here, are being added to my audio podcast on Apple and on Spotify? Simply search for Civically Minded and enjoy solid Christian content on your long commute, while at work or the gym, or wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. And be sure to tell a friend how they too can enjoy Civically Minded. Well, my guest today is the president of Mount Capra and Mount Athos Performance, two leading companies in the field of optimum human performance. Joe carries both a bachelor and a master of science degrees in human nutrition, and he's certified in permaculture design. He runs a 500 goat dairy operation in the Pacific Northwest with Elizabeth, his bride of 17 years, and their 10 children. They are taking the Dominion mandate seriously there in the Northwest. I'm excited to invite Mr. Joe Stout on Civically Minded. Welcome, Joe.
Corey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation and kind of get to know you. I've been working through a company called Pingo Media, which of course you know who Pingo is, and they've been scheduling folks and helping bring some really amazing guests onto my show. And they said, "Hey, why don't you go to our website and look around and see if we have anybody else that you'd like to have on?" And I mean, immediately you stood out because I thought, what an just so much there that I'd love to talk about, and that I found not only just interesting but really compelling, because I don't know if you're seeing this, Joe, and I'd be interested if this has been your experience again, because every region, even of the country, is a little bit different, of course, and maybe there in the Pacific Northwest, you guys may be more health conscious than I live in the Southeast, and we like buttered biscuits and grits and things like that. So
And
so
sweet
we're
tea.
and sweet tea, that's right, and sweet tea and pecan pie and all that good stuff. So I don't know if this is going to be the same for you, but I will say that in the world that I'm in, and I work at a church full time. I'm on pastoral staff, but I'm part of this weird Christian podcasting world, and I'm on X and all of the stuff, all the platforms, right? And I certainly seem to be seeing more Christians talking about health and wellness than really I remember at any other time in my life. And I'm 47 years old, so at 47, I'm seeing a lot more, and especially young people, say the 30 and unders, who are really starting to take their nutrition, their health, just all of that a lot more seriously than when I was, say, that age. So are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that that is our experience up here in the Pacific Northwest as well. And in fact, Mount Athos Performance, which is one of the two brands that I help to run, it was formed out of an alliance, if you will, between me and a gentleman that attends church with me. He's in his early 20s, and it was largely based off of his idea that the idea of Mount Athos was born, because these are the things that he cares about, and it's not just him, it's people like him, and there's a lot of these, like you said, I think under 30 crowd that is just more interested in not only disciplining the soul but also disciplining the body, recognizing that connection between body and soul. They're not like, we're not Gnostic, where we think the only thing that matters is the spirit. It's the body matters too. And I think in a lot of ways, some of these younger folks are seeing that in a clearer way than some of us who are in our 40s and up.
Now, again, I'm going to just dive right into some topics here, because my wife and I have been on a health journey that is certainly still very much in process. And having kids a little bit later in life, like we did, makes it to where we're going, okay, if I want to be able to play pitch and catch with my kids, if I want to be able to see my grandkids and actually still be able to pick them up, at my age, because I've got a 9, a 6, and a 2-year old, and I'm 47. So by the time my 2-year old is, 20, well, I'm gonna be 6 old, so if I want, again, to be able to really enjoy my grandkids and things like that and be around to see them for any amount of time, I need to start planning, for that, and taking care of myself a little better than maybe I had been prior. And of course, I think COVID woke so many people up to, wait a minute, you mean the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry might not completely have my best interest at heart, you know, and maybe we should have all known that a little more, but I think I can speak for, again, say the 35, 40 and older crowd to go, I assumed if you were in that industry that you were doing it for all the right reasons. I mean, it's like when you see a pastor that, has done some horrific, and I don't mean sin, we all sin, but you read about the pastors that have, abused children or something, and you're like, whoa, wait wait a second, and you kind of think, how did these guys get in? And so when we looked at the medical industry post COVID, and then we started to see that it wasn't just big pharma, it was big agra, and that all of the food products in this country have really, they have changed. They've changed a ton even in my lifetime. And certainly if you go back to my parents, or certainly my grandparents' lifetime, where things were a lot of whole foods, there wasn't a lot of additives and things like that, tons of processed sugar. Their diet was very different than ours, was it not?
Yeah, yeah. The food supply has had some improvements to it over the years, but I would say it's had several or a significant more amount of degradation at the same time. So there have been some advances, but those are going to be a lot fewer and far between. And part of the problem comes not from the free market nature of the food supply, but actually the kind of crony capitalism that ends up happening in a lot of the food regulation. So you end up having industries writing their own regulations, but they write it at the level of like multinational corporation. And so if you are involved in the kind of work where you are providing food just for your community, maybe you're not on the state level or a national level scale, it can be very difficult be very difficult to make ends meet. Farming has always been hard. The joke is the way you make a small fortune in farming is to start with a large fortune. Um, but so it's always been hard to make money in farming. But there's always been something deeper to it. It's like you are the one that's responsible for giving life to providing the means of life for your customer base. And when you have four or five multinational corporations owning most of the food brands, and really, they because they're traded on the stock market, and there's this expectation of perpetual year over year growth. A lot of times, the end consumer. It's a lot of these people in the regulatory world, they're true believers. They think that they're really doing the greatest good kind of thing. But oftentimes, what happens is that in the name of public safety, you actually get a lot of the potency of food gets lost in the shuffle. So in some ways, we have a much safer food supply now than we used to, but it's safer at the cost of a lot of the nutritional vitality that our grandparents enjoyed. Partly because they were just grow a lot of times growing their own food, or it was more local people growing it for them. So there was sometimes more food safety issues, but that food that they were getting was far more nutritionally potent than it is now. And so that's where some of the food safety things have gotten better in terms of, we don't have necessarily widespread listeria outbreaks very often
Okay.
anymore, whereas in the past that has been a problem. But we just have like, just because McDonald's doesn't make you sick from, E. coli, that's a good thing, but it doesn't mean that McDonald's was actually overall a holistically good meal for you. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdown has come, and that's where maybe some of you had alluded to the 35 and older crowd. Maybe you could put us in that realm of maybe the boomers who came from that generation that whatever your doctor says, you do. You know, your
Yeah.
doctor has the ultimate authority to tell you what to do. I think we as a generation kind of threw that out, but we didn't quite throw out the whole idea of, you know, the federal food regulators are there for my best interest. Even if on the inside, some of those food regulators do really want the best interest as a whole, because of the revolving doors of food regulation and industry. Oftentimes, the people who are running the food industry or the food regulators are the same ones that then go and run companies, and then they go back in and run food regulation. So you get kind of this revolving door of regulators going in and out of regulation and industry. Because of that, you end up uh, you end up having a rougher time for food choices, and it really does become a race to the bottom of the lowest common denominator.
Well, we've seen that certainly in that big pharma space too, where you'll have a senator or a congressperson, and then they'll leave their post there in Washington and they'll get on the board at Pfizer or Eli Lilly or some other big pharmaceutical company. We see this certainly in um, arm drawing a blank on the word, but the military industrial complex. Pardon me. There it is. We
Oh
see
yeah,
this in
yeah,
the
absolutely.
military industrial complex. They'll go work for one of the big military providers, and then, like you said, after they've dipped their toes and maybe got on the board of directors there, they may serve again in Washington. So that they can then help to facilitate even more. Um,
Yeah,
whether it's government contracts or whatever it happens to be.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that for me was such an eye opener in all of the wrong ways, having grown up in the kind of 80s and into the 90s, graduated high school in 1996. And so the Joe Camel, Marlboro Man, all of that when cigarettes were in their heyday, and everybody smoked. And I mean, it was just part of the cultural zeitgeist that everyone smoked. And it was starting to change some, but then the government really, really got involved. Kind of, I would say it was probably in the 90s, and they put the kibosh on any kind of the Joe Camel. Hey, you're advertising for kids, and you're doing all this stuff, and so when I read, and it's probably been a couple of years ago now, where I read that big tobacco divested from that and went into big agra, and it's the same companies, it's the same money, it's the same
Yep.
people, and they pivoted their resources and kind of that, but they had the same mentality that they did when they were in the tobacco business of, hey, how do we sell more tobacco? Well, you make it as easy to get as possible and as addictive as possible. And, so now we're in food. How do we make food more profitable? Well, you make it
Yep.
even more available, and you start to put things in it that might make it a little more addictive, or a little more, maybe addictive is not even the right word. But I mean, that was, again, much like what I was saying about COVID. That was such an eye opener for my wife and I, who now have these young children, and we're going, wow, if we want to protect our kids as Christian parents, um,
Hmm.
and we want to do it not just like you said, not just their souls, not just their minds, not just their morality, but we want to teach them how to be one day good adults, good humans. How do they make good
Hmm.
choices? Well, that includes their bodies, that includes their wellness, and that was shocking to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I with you. You bring up a very interesting point with the Philip Morrises of the world, and how they divested into food, because food has historically. I mean, everybody has, you have to eat, right? You
Right.
have to eat. So it's like this you have an unlimited customer base because it's the whole world. But the our brains, even though personally I completely reject the theory of evolution, there is absolutely biology in our brain that causes us to crave and to seek out in large amounts fat, salt, and sugar. And those are the three things: fat, salt, and sugar, that you find in all processed foods in large amounts. And those are the three ingredients that are most likely to be used by the multinational food conglomerates, because they know that our brain is wired, um, by the God who made us. Our brain is wired to seek those things out because in a natural setting, fat, salt, and sugar are scarce. They're not in an abundance, and so our brain, it's like we are programmed to think, to seek out hyper palatable foods. And when we find those hyper palatable foods, there is a sense in which, there is, you can become enslaved to them, much like you do drugs.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of chemical pathways that are engaged, dopamine releases and whatnot, when you consume junk food, when you consume hyper palatable food, that your body is like, I want more of that, and I have no mechanism for shutting that off. And so you see people who struggle with self control, um, those are the ones who oftentimes are experiencing the worst effects of this. We all suffer in one way or another, but there are those in our society who just naturally have less inhibitions on holding themselves, accountable for these kinds of things. That's where you have like this American ideal, and I don't think it's just American, but I think we're kind of perfecting it. This American ideal of just like, incredible obesity, and yet we have to somehow celebrate it as being like all bodies are beautiful. Well, there is a sense in which you are actually taking the gift of life that you've been given and just spurning it, if you allow yourself to be so enslaved, much like a drug addict would be as well in a situation like that. So the government has historically, much like they did with cigarettes, they have historically had an incentive to see public health be improved. And this is one of the areas where it is we have such outdated um, um, recommendations and guidelines from our regulators. And I'm not even saying that they should be regulating, but the reality is that they are. They make the regulations for schools, for prisons, for hospitals, for every government funded, all of the military. All of those are operating on nutritional data that's 50 years old, where you're trying to limit fat, and you're trying to really do a lot of carbohydrates, and make sure you have all of your processed synthetic vitamins and things like that. Those are all old. That's all like old data. A good example would be, um, the federal regulations do not allow schools to offer whole milk to students. You can't even give it away. Like if a farmer has a bunch of whole milk he wants to give away, he has to do it in the school's parking lot, because federal law does not allow whole milk. Well, whole milk is, there's studies that show that skim milk affects blood sugar worse than even soda does. But we still have these federal mandates that show that, like, oh, you need to be drinking, low fat or skim milk, when in reality what you need to be drinking is whole milk. That's by far the better food. That's just the way that milk was created. So those are just the kinds of areas where we have, the tools that we have, the overreach that we have. Not only is it so present, but it's also present in the wrong direction too.
Now, thank you for bringing that up, because there's something that I'm here in North Carolina, and there's something that's just been popping off here in North Carolina about should they outlaw raw milk here in our state. Now, up to this point, raw milk has not been outlawed, but it's not
Yeah,
readily available. I mean, you have to seek it out. You have to go to, to local farmers and things like that and seek out raw milk. And there are some places even near me that do provide it if you're looking for it. But tell my audience kind of the difference between, say, that concept of a raw milk and what we would go to the store and pick up, just, vitamin D whole milk that's pasteurized and, goes through the
sure.
processing.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the raw milk, pasteurized milk debate is very broad. It's vast, and there's lots of strong opinions on that. Um, so I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is that there are advantages to raw milk, but that due to its nature, that there are also significant disadvantages in terms of uh, producing it at scale in a safe way. So I'll give you an example. If you owned a goat or a cow and you went out and you milked the cow and you were moderately clean, you didn't let the cow put its hoof in the bucket, that raw milk would be perfectly fine to drink. Um, but the way any large dairy works, and when I say a large dairy, this could be a dairy of 40 cows. So we're not talking like a massive confined animal feeding operation, CAFO. We're talking about every farm, every dairy has automatic milkers, and automatic
Yep.
milkers are hooked to stainless steel lines, and there's connections, and there's all kinds of places for bacteria to harbor, and so therefore, when you start doing raw milk at scale, the some of the risks do in fact increase. And so the it's generally not. It's generally I've seen it more by the states, but the feds will get involved in raw milk too if you happen to be selling it across state lines. That they can
Yeah.
get involved then too. But it's generally states that regulate this. But if you are willing to do raw milk, then the standard has to be much higher because of the tendency towards foodborne pathogens. But if you buy pasteurized milk, pasteurized milk starts its life out as the same way as raw milk does, but
Mhm.
it does go through a pasteurization step. Generally, what that is it's being brought up to 165 degrees for 15 seconds, which it does destroy some of the enzymes. It does denature vitamin C. But if your source of vitamin C and your source of enzymes and whatnot is raw milk, it's generally not where people get their vitamin C. Even though it does denature it, it's not a great source of vitamin C, anyways. Then one of the things that most milk manufacturers do, and I wish they wouldn't, but then they homogenize it. And homogenizing it is, in my opinion, a far more detrimental process than pasteurization. Pasteurization, I don't think really affects the value of the milk that much, but I think homogenization is where you get more of the problems, and that's where they actually take the milk and they actually force it through a very very small orifice. And at least for cow milk, what that does is it takes up the large fat globules, breaks them up into small pieces, small fat globules, and basically it makes a homogeneous mixture. Now, a side note, I'm biased towards goats in all things, but goat's milk is actually naturally homogenized. So goat's milk doesn't need to go through the homogenization step. But then after it's homogenized, then generally, yeah, they'll add the vitamin D and the vitamin A, and then they send it out the door for consumption. Even the vitamin D and vitamin A is kind of a relic of the past. That was back when rickets were an issue, and the food supply was so, you had people in the inner cities literally just eating flour, eating bread. That was all they had, and so they were developing these rickets. That's when they started adding some of those ingredients to milk. That's probably something that could easily be sunsetted. That we don't really need to do that anymore, but that probably will never go away. But that's really the big difference is that raw milk is basically you're going to get it just basically right off the farm. There's no what would be considered like a hazard control point with raw milk. You're relying on the farmer's operation to be incredibly clean, and if it is, then raw milk's great. It's huge. It's hugely good. However, if it's not, and it's very easy for dairies to not be very clean, then you have some of the worst pathogens actually will come in raw milk. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but those because milk is mostly water, very easy for bacteria to move within milk within raw milk. So it is easy to get contaminated. So that's where I would generally tend towards people if they're in any way compromised to stay away from raw milk, just because I think the risks outweigh the benefits. But there are a lot of people, Corey, who will disagree with me on that.
Yeah. Yeah. For the audience that are city folk, my wife and I live on a 15-acre, what you would call like a hobby farm, because obviously you have 500 goat production. I mean that takes some serious amount of land, and I'm not gonna ask how much you got, but I mean, yeah, you've got. I grew up in the rural Midwest, and I live on a 15-acre farm, and we do have goats and cows.
Yeah.
Now you do everything that I understand to a greater scale. You know much more about it. I'm not going to pretend to know what you know, but I know enough, having grown up in a rural environment and still, raising my own children in a fairly rural environment, that for you city folks watching and listening, barns and farms are not the cleanest places in the world. So when Joe says that it's exceedingly easy to have a dairy production that's not, clean. I mean, that's just true. Animals by nature are are messy. I mean, your stall is never cleaner than when the animals aren't there. So I mean,
Yep.
there's just something about animals that I mean, they use the bathroom where they want, and they step where they want, and they do what they want, and you really have a hard time kind of keeping them in places you don't want them. It's they're just, you know that's the nature of having animals. So as I said, we have a small, just more like a hobby farm, but we enjoy it immensely. And our goats are a mixture of, our Billy is a Nubian, and most of our nannies, are pygmies. So our kids are kind of a crossbreed of a pygmy, Nubian, crossbreeding, and so they come out a nice medium size, because the pygmies being kind of a very small breed, and of course the Nubians being a rather large breed. So those are the goats that I have experience with. We enjoy them. They make the kids laugh and run and have fun, and and I've bottle fed and done some of that, that again, everyone kind of, online, or on these cutesy TV shows where they, make this lifestyle look like it's all fun and no work. That you get the, oh, and they don't realize that you're bottle feeding because you're scared to death that you're going to lose this baby because their mother's not feeding properly, or they're not latching properly, or they don't really equate that. They think that we're just going out there at 3 in the morning to bottle feed because it's what we do. It's
Yeah.
fun. It's a
Right.
good time, you know. And so I always kind of chuckle at my friends that don't know this lifestyle at all, and they're like, "Oh, I bet that's awesome." And I'm like, "Yeah, if you think that it happens at 7 o'clock at night when you want to do it, and that they just sit in your lap perfectly, and fawningly look up at you like, oh, thank you. Yeah, that's not how this happens." That's
Right.
so I
Yep.
always get tickled with folks like that, and I'm sure on a big production like yours even more so. So I want to make sure that I understood kind of a little bit about what you're talking about. Um, when we reduce the bioavailability, of some of, say, our raw foods like fruits and vegetables and things like that, I think a lot of people, are hearing more and more about, um, pesticides and herbicides and all kinds of things, that whether it's Monsanto or other huge companies that are, again, and that's leaching into your food, or worse, it's just flat out in your food. So you reduce some of the bioavailability of raw food, and then, like you said, we're working off these antiquated, very outdated suggestions from Health and Human Services, or other huge governmental organizations like that, what that say, eat twice to three times as many carbohydrates as you do, like, red meat. And red meat's just, I mean, I still hear it all the time. Oh, red meat's bad for you. And I'm like,
Right.
really? Really? Red meat's bad for you. Okay.
Right.
So
Yep.
hasn't that kind of made this very bizarre toxic cocktail where we're not really sure? I mean, it's very easy to go to the grocery store or even to a farmer's market and kind of go, what do I buy?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are kind of, you can one of the problems with this question, Corey, is that there are all kinds of rabbit holes that you can go down, and
Yeah.
and there's really no end to them. So I like to keep things as simple as I possibly can. Um, because there is, what you're saying is absolutely true. The farming practices ever since the Great Depression, the farming practices in the U.S. have been not in any way regenerative. Regenerative farming is something that has been starting to catch on here in the last 15 to 20 years, and it's a very good. I don't want to call it a trend because I want it to continue. But regenerative biodynamic farming, where you actually are adding more to the soil than you're removing through your farming practices, that's something that we need our farmers to do more of. And as I'm sure you knew growing up in the Midwest, a lot of there is this immense gift from God called the topsoil of the Midwest. And in some places, it was 4 feet deep when we first got here. And a lot of our farming practices have really destroyed a lot of that topsoil and really used it up. And so now we do a lot of chemical farming where everything is grown with NPK chemicals, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That is a problem, and that does reduce the availability of minerals and vitamins in our vegetables to a great deal. So you can get around some of that by buying locally, by buying organic. That will help for sure. But that's kind of like almost a little bit more advanced that a lot of people need to do. What I think is one of the most helpful things people can do is to just limit how much food you buy that's already ready to eat. Or unless it's a fruit or vegetable. Fruits or vegetables are ready to eat. Like that's okay. You should wash them, but those are ready to eat. But everything else, the more things we make ourselves, the better off we're going to be in terms of in terms of how much processed food we're taking in. Take for example, this is a good example I like, fried chicken. If you like fried chicken, you can go to KFC and you can get way more than you should be eating, and you can do that 3 times a day if you want. But if you are committed to just making it yourself, you'll make your own fried chicken, and if you do it right, it'll be the best fried chicken you've ever had. But it'll make such a mess, you'll be like, okay, I'm good for a while, and you
Yeah.
you won't have that desire to like just cram down the processed food like you do with DoorDash and Uber Eats and these services that literally will bring these hyper palatable foods to your door. I mean, the brain is like cannot we can't deal with all of this availability of free food. There is a great book I would highly recommend. It's very evolutionary. So the author is not a Christian. He promotes the evolutionary theory. So with that warning out of the way, it's an eye opener, and it's called The Hungry Brain. And a lot of what I'm describing here is I got from that book, which is the idea that your brain is wired to look for these hyperpalatable foods. And even if you just limited the amount of foods you ate, you would, in a lot of cases, if you just limit yourself to simple foods, you'll lose weight because your brain just will stop craving them like crazy. What's the first thing you can do? Well, definitely connect up with your local farmers if you can. You know, um, farmers markets are great. A lot of times, though, your real farmers aren't going to necessarily be selling at a farmers market because they're more social events. And this is not true across the board, but oftentimes they're more social events, and there's just not enough foot traffic for a farmer to justify leaving the farm to go do that. So probably the better thing you're going to find is some type of CSA, community supported agriculture. There's a gentleman that attends our church, and he does CSA boxes throughout the year, and he creates these boxes and then he delivers them house to house. And so you get freshly picked produce from his large scale farm, but it's still operated by him and his family. CSAs are a great option if you've got them in your area. I would definitely look into that as well. And if those aren't available, commercially produced produce, it's not the end of the world. It's far better than processed food. Yes, there's lots of things that could make it better, but it's not poison. I think sometimes in the organic conventional debate, you can get people to overthink it. Really, what you're trying to do is eliminate as much processed food as possible. As many seed the seed oil trend, that's a real one. Like we got to get rid of the seed oils because that is an industrial. Those are like industrial waste products, and that we're consuming them at these incredibly high levels. So eliminate the seed oils. Try to eliminate the processed food, and if you do one or the other, you'll eliminate both. And focus on making your own food as much as you can.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. My wife bakes and does some of that, and has recently got more into usually historically, her baking was more desserts and things because well we like them. But now she's gotten into baking bread and things like that. And you're not wrong. I mean
Sure.
that it takes time. So by the time that she makes the dough, it's got to rise, it's got to rest, and then she's got to punch it down and stretch it, and then it's got to rest again. I mean, there's enough of a process at play that it's almost hard to
Yeah.
overeat or to overconsume or to have the time in the day to make enough to where you're having that problem. So I look back at my, my grandparents, my great grandparents, and generations previous, and there's lifestyle choices certainly that have changed as well, right? I mean, we're a lot more of a sedentary culture, especially when it comes to work. Our grandparents or great grandparents, they were up and moving from sun up to sundown, and a lot of them were farming and doing things like that. They were working hard, they were building a country. And so we live on the shoulders of those giants, and much of their labor has made life much easier for us, which in some ways is wonderful, right? I mean, here we sit having a podcast, and again, doing all of that because they did all the things they did. So, I thank God for them. And I'm not certainly not blaming them for any of this, but all of that success has led to now we have such sedentary lifestyles and such abundance that again, for the average adult, you sit at a desk, for 40 or 50 hours a week. And unless you're very proactive about it, and you've got, one of the health watches that tells you every hour or two, hey, stand up, walk around, do so. I mean, you literally can just sit for 8, 9, 10 hours a day every day. And then we wonder why our waistlines are expanding and our diets are also not great. So you start, and then something that just naturally happens to all of us is we age. And I'm noticing, that now as I'm pushing much closer to 50 than 40, my metabolism, of course, has slowed dramatically. I used to say, and maybe this is the easiest way to say it. I grew up playing a ton of sports. Played soccer in high school. Got scholarship offers to play soccer, so I was a pretty high level athlete. And in those days, I could eat whatever I wanted, do whatever I wanted, and I was in great shape. And then I got past that age and I could still kind of eat whatever I wanted as long as I was still exercising pretty regularly, which again was playing ball or, I mean, it wasn't, hardcore up at 5:30 hitting the gym it was just life, right? I was just still an active guy. And then I hit the age where it was, well, no, I got to be a little more careful about what I eat. And I still need to supplement that with some exercise. Well, now I'm pushing toward 50. And now it's okay, I got to be rigid about what I eat. I have to be rigid about exercise. And even with both of those, it's still going to be a bit of a challenge. And, and so that age factor starts to play in too. And you go, wow, the deck is really, and again, from a Christian perspective and a pastoral perspective, well, these are all effects of sin. We look at the fall and we kind of go, this is what happens. Eh, we were meant to live forever and have everything we needed. We mucked that up, and now we have to deal with the repercussions of that fall. And so as our bodies degenerate, yeah, it takes a very significant amount of effort to start thinking through. Okay, how am I going to take care of myself best? And that is an amazing thing. One of the encouraging things that I think I see on the horizon, and we're now living kind of under in the modern administration. And I'd be curious how you feel about it because he's such a polarizing figure. And no, I'm not talking about Trump, who is also a polarizing figure. But RFK Jr., of course, famously is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And I know, again, that's a very polarizing choice. Some people are like, look, he's not a doctor. He has no experience. What are we doing? I mean, we're the laughing stock of any, civilized nation that's going, your Secretary of Health and Human Services is this guy. But then there's other people that look at his like Make America Healthy initiatives and they're going, doctor or not, he's at least starting to say some things out loud. What say you? How do you feel about our current place as are we starting to look at things from a top down perspective that make you feel positive?
Yeah, I was dumbfounded when not only was he nominated but confirmed. Dumbfounded in the happiest way possible. Like I'm thrilled that he's in there. Um, and if we are the laughing stock of the world, if you just do a quick Google search on the health ministers of many of the European countries out there, you'll recognize that they all share some similarities in which we don't really want to imitate. So if we've got to be the laughing stock, it doesn't really bother me. Um, I'm a Christian, so I certainly can't support him in a lot of his non-Christian policies with abortion, and those are like those are bad things. Those are things that are incurring the wrath of God upon our nation. So I don't want to discount those, but I also don't want to miss the fact that we would have. I mean, we've always sat under pretty bad HHS directors. Most of which have always upheld the abortion things. And so basically, we're getting the same when it comes to that, but we're getting a guy that has like a completely fresh perspective on fluoride in the water, on vaccines, on some of these things that a debate has really um, historically, from the official source sense, has been absolutely stifled. Like, if you're going to question vaccine injuries, vaccine efficacy, vaccine frequency, you are a crackpot. And so now we have RFK Jr. at the top of the heap, not necessarily saying don't vaccinate your kids, but just recognizing the fact that there are multiple viewpoints from very qualified opinions on this. I'm incredibly helpful. I'm incredibly encouraged about that. The infant formula world, the commercial infant formula world, is a nightmare in the U.S. Like, the ingredients that we are the laughing stock in the U.S. In the world for the ingredients that we allow in infant formula. So corn syrup and soybean oil and canola oil, and I mean, these are things that should not be in an infant's diet, and yet it's the most highly regulated food in the U.S. So I'm very, very excited to see him really go to task on trying to clean those out of our infant formula supply. There's no reason that they're in there except lobbyists.
Yeah.
Lobbyists are the reason why corn producers want to see corn syrup be a viable alternative, a viable ingredient to have in baby formula. I think it should never be used in baby formula unless it's an emergency situation. It's just not a natural food to give an infant. It doesn't mimic mother's milk at all. So the fact that RFK is taking these ideas and kind of shifting the Overton window to making them acceptable to discuss is a huge win. We should be thanking the Lord for the stream of the king's heart is like a stream in the hands in the hands of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. This is a very good thing. There's a lot of really good things. Uh, Christians still have a lot of repenting to do. Judgment begins in the house of the Lord. But I'm very encouraged that RFK Jr. is at the head of the HHS.
I would actually share your hope and optimism on that, because to your point, and again, people can say, well, that's just being judgmental. No, it's having eyeballs. I mean, I look at our last HHS secretary. I mean, seriously? Where do you even start? I mean, it's,
Right.
the gender dysphoria, the terrible body figure as far as just completely overweight. And I mean, that person was not healthy in any respect. And
Right.
to your point, a lot of Europe's health ministers are severely overweight. They're in any number of other problems. I could Google right now, as could anyone listening, a picture of RFK with his shirt off, and at his age, the man looks incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
I,
Right.
I'm like, this. If this guy doesn't know what health is, someone needs to tell him otherwise. Because holy smokes, this guy certainly looks healthy, certainly seems healthy. So I share your optimism that I'm grateful to have a man who at least takes physical health. If he doesn't take our health seriously, it's obvious he takes his own pretty seriously, and that's something that is worth something. I kind of pivot real quick, and I know we're kind of rounding towards the latter half of the interview here, and this may sound like an kind of out of left field, but we've touched on it kind of peripherally. I remember, I think I was in college, and like I said, I graduated high school in 96, so this was probably 98, 99, right around the turn of the millennium there. And I remember doing a paper at the time on what, for me, was a new term at that time, and that term was GMO, or genetically, modified foods. And I had worked in the restaurant industry as a young guy, like so many young people do. I'd actually ended up going off to culinary school after that and becoming a chef. And so I stayed in the restaurant world for 15 years, from 15 till about 30, and love that industry. Still find a ton of enjoyment in the kitchen and all of that. So I mean, I have some experience in the food service world. And I remember, like I said, in the late 90s, reading that term GMO for the what for me was the first time. Maybe they'd been around for decades and I was just oblivious to it. But that's something that since then has been very much on the radar of most of us at least. And so when we talk about what's going on, and I like that you're I really appreciate your measured approach to a lot of these questions. And I know they're very open-ended, broad questions, because not only am I limited in my knowledge of these topics, the audience is too, right? I mean, we certainly do not have uh, um, a ton of knowledge in this, which is why I wanted to have you on. You bring a expertise to this that I think is so very helpful, because this is a discussion more Americans and especially more Christians are starting to have. So it is vital that we do start to educate ourselves, and the only way to do so is have these conversations with people that have the expertise. So thank you for I appreciate the way that you've not been super hyperbolic either one direction or the other. So when I read about genetically modified foods there in the late 90s for the first time, I remember being mortified, and being like, "Wait, we're doing what?" And then as I've aged and I have tried to read more or listen to, educated folks like yourself and go, "Well, there might be advantages." And certainly, like all things in a sinful world, can they be bastardized? Can they be manipulated? Can they be used to bad ends? Well, sure. So, briefly touch on, what that term means. Because again, my wife would be a very typical Christian conscientious person. She looks at things. Again, she thinks organic means it's perfect and non-organic means it's poison or dangerous. And you kind of mentioned that earlier. And again, I appreciate that you've been very honest. So touch on that briefly of kind of, can we go too far? Can we look at some of this and be like, and we're just pearl clutching and we're really kind of going overboard?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and it's definitely something. I mean, if I had to characterize my position, it would be anti-GMO in almost every situation. But I also share what you said, that there could possibly be situations where they could be useful for ending world hunger and things like that. That I don't want to entirely discount. The EU, I don't normally point to the EU as like things that I want us to emulate, but one of the things I would be in favor of is just a ban on genetically modified organisms in the food supply, including in our animals' food supply. So in feeds and whatnot,
Yep.
just a ban on just utilizing that, ban on the research of it. There are certain things that we just don't need to mess with. And so, for example, GMOs do not mean that you've just crossed, a couple of different varieties of a plant. That's not a genetically modified organism. That is a different. It is a genetically modified. It is genetically modified in the sense that it's a new species. But genetically modified in the GMO sense means that you take some type of genetic material that is completely foreign to the plant or animal, and you splice it into the gene sequence so that you get basically a Frankenstein type ingredient, if you will. So a very famous example of this, and I forget the name of the corn, but there's a type of corn where they took, I believe it was a piece of mouse DNA, and they injected it into the mouse DNA or into the corn DNA, and that caused a certain type of weevil, or it may have been some type of worm, to die if it basically became poisonous to the worm. That's the kind of thing that, although because of Adam's sin, we have to the ground has been cursed, and by the sweat
That's
of
right.
our brow we have to bring food from the earth. Even though that does exist, doesn't mean that we should be poisoning animals, and then just hoping it doesn't poison us. It seems short-sighted and incredibly money-driven, profit-driven, as opposed to like creation, dominion mandate, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the other kind of GMO that is pretty dangerous would be the idea of like a Roundup ready plant. So a plant that
Mhm.
has been genetically modified so that it can basically not get affected by Roundup or glyphosate or any of the pesticides, because then, and it's not necessarily even so much the genetically modified aspect of it, but it's just the fact that that plant has now been soaked in pesticides. And
Yeah.
so you basically have taken what would have been maybe a smaller yield on a field. You've increased the yield, but at the expense of now much higher pesticide count on that vegetable. So I would take actually a fairly anti-libertarian approach on GMOs, in the same way I would for cloning people. Like, I don't think cloning people should be allowed, because it's like that's going outside. It's a Tower of Babel type
That's
scenario
right.
that I think that we as a society should hold our government lawmakers to a standard that says we don't want to get even anywhere near the Tower of Babel, where we try to be God or try to be like God in that regard. So I would take a almost an exclusively anti-GMO stance. I'm definitely in the minority in terms of the U.S., because the U.S. has just lots of GMO stuff, and so it can be very hard navigating the world. Like, what ingredients are the best ones? Um, we were initially the non-GMO project. I really appreciate them. Your listeners can find out more information on the non-GMO project. I would say that that's from the interactions I've had with that company. That they're the real deal in terms of wanting to make sure that the products that have their stamp non-GMO really are non-GMO. But it's also helpful to know that if you're buying organic, that built into organic is non-GMO as well. So you don't need to choose between organic or non-GMO. If you buy organic, if you're willing to spend the extra money, organic includes non-GMO as well. Whereas certain ingredients, maybe organic just isn't a possibility for those, and so non-GMO would be a better selection. So, for example, if I'm at the store and I'm buying sugar for a bag of sugar, I'm going to get the non-GMO sugar over the non-GMO sugar, because beets, that's where all sugar comes from. Beets are a highly genetically modified um, vegetable. And so that's one I just, it's not that big of a difference, but I'm not necessarily getting the organic sugar. But if I was, I would also be getting the non-GMO. So hopefully that's helpful in terms
Oh,
of
that's
clearing
that's
up some of those
extremely helpful.
GMOs. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's incredibly helpful because again, I think we don't know what we don't know. You know, and that's true in every topic, of course. But I think this is what's been so eye-opening for my wife and I and others in say our church that we've got this little group that especially the moms, there's a whole text thread that my wife's part of that's what they call the crunchy moms,
mhm,
and they're trying to take a lot more seriously these topics. And the first thing that all those ladies have had to say to each other, and we as the husbands too, is one, we don't know much, and two, where are safe places to even go get information? And of course,
sure,
primarily we're looking to men like you that are Christians first and foremost.
sure.
That are brothers and sisters in Christ that are doing this well and that have got a proven track record of doing it well and starting there. It's why I was so, again, as soon as I read your bio, I was like, absolutely, I want to definitely have this guy on. Because it was just this is something that we've become increasingly interested and passionate about. And to kind of wrap it all the way back to at the beginning of our conversation, it plays into a kind of another side of that coin that we talked about back at the beginning of we're seeing more and more Christians take their health more seriously. Whether that's going to the gym and becoming, physically fit or being careful about the things that they're ingesting and putting into their body. That there's this incredible renaissance of Christian people kind of saying, hey, if we want to fulfill that dominion mandate, if we want to be faithful to the charge that the Lord has placed in front of us to grow the earth and make it resemble what he wanted it to be, then how do we do that faithfully? How do we do that well? And so thank you for kind of demystifying some of this for not only me but for the audience certainly, and for all the work that you're doing. Where can my audience find you, find your companies, maybe give us a little bit of information about both of the companies, kind of what Mount Capra and Mount Athos are doing, because they are
Sure.
different. I looked both of them up. They're kind of different companies doing different things. Tell them a little bit about what you're doing and where they can find you if they're interested in trying to purchase some of your products.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for that, Corey. I appreciate it. Yeah, Mount Capra is our family's business. It's actually a fifth generation farm here in the Pacific Northwest. It started in 1928. It was a father son team back then, and they ran it for about 50 years. And back in the 80s, my dad took it over. And in 2012, I actually came on board and started helping him run the farm. But my mom and dad, they live on the farm. My wife and I and our 10 kids live on the farm. So it's very much a family endeavor. And we produce a lot of goat milk, and then we process it into different ingredients. So colostrum, protein, minerals, those kinds of things. A butter, ghee butter, that's really delicious. And so a lot of in the nutritional health space. That's where you can find us. So mountcapra.com. That's M as in Mary, T as in Tom. Capra is the Latin word for goat. Mountcapra.com. We're in the Pacific Northwest where there's mountains everywhere. Mount Athos is a newer venture, and part of Mount Athos came out of the desire to reach some of the audience that you're describing, Corey. That those men and women who are more in the younger demographic, who are still taking their health very seriously. But we're doing similar things at Mount Athos that we are at Mount Capra. Just there are slight variations because we're looking more towards the performance side of things. One thing I would mention, just as I just close out my time here, and thank you very much for having me on. This has been a true pleasure. But it would just be a couple of things. Number one, for your listeners who are seeking better health, you didn't, if you're in a spot you wish you weren't, you didn't ruin your health overnight. It took some time, so you're not going to gain it all back overnight either. And so, really, you're going to get a tremendous benefit if you take the long term, dare we say, post millennial view of your own health, meaning
Yeah.
that you, even though, yes, David tells us in the Psalms, Moses tells us in the Psalms, Psalm 90, that a man's years are 70, or if by reason of strength, 80, but we all go back to the dust to which we came. So we can't cling to our health, and it should never become an idol. But there is absolutely everything good with giving thanks to God for the body He has given you, and part of the way we do that is by disciplining it. The number one health tip I can ever give you is to just thank God for every meal you have, everything you put into your body. Thank the Lord for that, even if it's that church potluck and you're not totally sure what it is that you're eating. You thank the Lord for it anyway, and you ask Him to bless it to you because, you know, as a friend of mine said, every 12-year-old boy is basically made out of peanut butter sandwiches, and the only way that can happen is because the Lord blessed it. So in all of your doings, keep on pressing on. Take that long-term view to your health because you're not going to get it back overnight, but you also, especially if you're in that younger crowd, it's much easier to maintain than to regain. So so put in the habits now. You will be grateful that you did later. And if you're just establishing new habits now, go for the long haul on this, because you will not ever wish you had done less. That's for sure. Thank you again, Corey, for having me on. This has been great.
Oh, I want to thank you, Joe. You've been a wonderful guest, and my goodness, just a replete with so much information. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch the episode myself just to really process everything that you were talking about and that you said. Because, like I said, my wife and I've been on this journey, and she had to fight me on it. I'll I'll confess. Let me repent to a fellow brother in Christ. I fought her on it. Because you're right. I like the junk. I mean, Snicker bars are good.
Yeah, sure.
And so she is faithfully, diligently, patiently worked with her hard-headed husband and our kids, and tried to make us a healthier family. And I bless her for that. I'm grateful to her for that. But thank you for educating the church, and certainly non-believers. I'm sure order your products too. I would encourage my guests and everyone, or pardon me, all my listeners, go check out these companies. Support Christian business. It's one of the ways we take dominion as Christians, is not only physically, not only spiritually, not only mentally, but if we're going to take dominion through culture, then one of the ways we do it is by supporting brothers and sisters in Christ, supporting their small businesses, and helping them have the resources to grow those businesses to the next level. So thank you, Joe Stout, for being here today. Thank you for your family's faithfulness for 3 generations there in the Pacific Northwest. For 10 kids, God bless you. We love to see that kind of dominion as well. I'm a good Presbyterian, so all of them would be baptized and pursuing catechesis. And thank you, of course, to all of you that listen to Civically Minded. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this content with someone else. Leave me a comment below on how this episode maybe challenged you or blessed you, or how our ministry has challenged or blessed you, or maybe if you disagree with me on something, that's fine too. Leave us a message. I really do read every single one of them. And until next time, I've been your host, Corey Wing. And remember, be brave, be bold, and always be civically minded. God bless.